Today we are taking this reference photograph and simplifying it to create this ink and watercolour bridge. I will go step by step through the drawing and painting process, including details of all the colour mixes and the equipment required. Before we start with the drawing, I just wanted to say that I'm using the Bockingford block today. I will put a list of my materials down in the description below. This one is a cold pressed or a not hot pressed, which are exactly the same thing, and it's archival and it's £140, which is 300 grams. I usually refer to them as £140. So as a beginner I wouldn't go with anything less than £140, and a cold press is an ideal one to start with. And I do use this one quite often here on YouTube because it's a lovely paper. Okay, so we're going to start with some pencil guidelines, and the thing about doing anything architectural is you perhaps need to do more measuring than you would normally. If you're regular to the channel, you will know that I don't like measuring things very much. I like to do things just by eye and be a little bit more expressive. Particularly if you want to be impressionistic or abstract, you might not always feel you want to measure everything. But with architecture, if you don't have it convincing, the viewer will soon pick up that that bridge looks like it may be going to tumble down, especially with things like houses. If the perspective's wrong, the eye picks things like that up. So a little bit of measuring with architecture is a good idea. So I'm just going to put the bridge quite small in the centre and leave lots of nice white paper around the outside. We're going to change the composition. We're going to get rid of that tree and those branches in the foreground and just make it about the bridge. And we're also going to change the colours. But to begin with, we'll have a look at the shape and get a few of those pencil guidelines in. We always need a start point with our drawings, and with this one I think this corner down here will be a good place to start, because if we look at it, we've got a similar length there, and if we go across, that comes to just about where it finishes there. So we've got that nice measurement where we know those two measurements are the same. I'm going to do it a bit smaller on my paper than it is here, but if we know that measurement's the same, we can soon get that in. So let's come a little bit further down. We're just going to have a bit of the river coming down here, but not too much. And I'm going to start by marking that corner. So that little dot there is this corner here. And I don't want to come up too high. I'm going to come to about here somewhere. So that's to the top of the bridge, so to here. And as we know that that measurement's a similar measurement to the one that goes across, we could put that there. So I've just decided I wanted that length to fit on this piece of paper. If you wanted to, you could do it exactly the same, and that would make it very easy. So you could get your ruler and just measure that, mark those dots down, measure, and keep measuring and put in little markers where the most obvious places are. So, or you could halve it, you know, if you wanted to be half size, or double it. So just compare measurements as we go along. So we've got that across there. So now we need to look at how far up where the wall starts. So the wall is about here before the arch. You perhaps can't, you might not be able to pick this up, but this is where kind of the bottom of the wall, this wall is, and then this one starts. And it's less than half the way up, isn't it? If we look, it's about a third of the way up. So we're coming up to about here somewhere with that. And then if we go across from there, the bridge on this side starts slightly, you have to guess this because of this tree, but it's starting about there. So it's just a little bit down maybe from there. We can make it more, just tiny bit down. So we then need to look at how far along we come along here. So again, sorry, I might not be under the camera there. So if we look from we started here, if you remember, across to where the wall stops is about halfway or just less than halfway across. So from here, less than halfway is about where the wall stops there, and of course it's at an angle. So we can start and put one or two lines in. Do them very faintly because we could come to erasing these later on. So we won't actually draw the river in at the moment, we'll just draw the bridge. So we're imagining it starts here, so this is this point here. We imagine this dot here is actually redundant, we've just got that to place that. I'm not going to go as far along here with the stone as the actual picture has. So I'm just going to indicate that, and the same on this side, indicate the wall going off, and look at that angle. I mean, it is obscured by the grass, and actually this wall comes this way. We've got some stone coming this way as well, so that kind of carries on there, and you've got a little bit of shadow there. I'm not sure there isn't a gap in the wall there, or if it's just, no, it's shadow from this bow, isn't it? So because we're getting rid of this, we need to remember that afterwards, that this shadow won't be here, because this is going, so it's not going to be casting shadow. So the only shadow we're really going to think about is the one under the bridge there. Okay, so if we carry on, we've got that, so this point is the top of the bridge, so we need to look at how this curve goes. So it's a very, very gentle curve, doesn't go up much at all. When you're doing a curve like that, do little short lines rather than trying to do it all as one solid line. Okay, so this is the line there, and then of course it comes down slightly, and then that's that little bit of wool. So from here we need to do our arch, which is going to go, so start with this line here. So we're going from this dot to this dot. I'll just pop that down a moment. So it's quite a steep curve. And much sharper on this side. And we can refine that and we can come back to it. It actually wants to be more like that. Okay, so we've got that line in. Now we've got that line in, we can put the back one in. So look at where this point is here. So that's another point to think about. So it's about a third of the way across. Again, we started with these two dots here, and that point's about a quarter or a third of the way across. So about here somewhere. So all we're doing with our measuring is all comparing things and lining things up. So use your pencil, see where it lines up down here, see where this line is. All the time comparing. So from here, quite a steep curve down to there, and you'll see you've got that little jut coming out, little ledge, and then obviously the individual stones are making these shapes a little bit more complicated than we've got here at the moment. We're just putting those rough lines in. So we've got the bottom line of this. We now need the top line. So look at how far out this comes. Not too far, about here somewhere. And follow the other line all the way around. So you've just got a little gap up here where you're going to sit some stones in. So we've got the grass going up here. So look at where the ground comes and down there. So just indicate that, and here. And actually you end up not being able to see it here, don't you? So this gets a bit complicated here. We'll leave a lot of this out. And then put the line of the stream this way as well. I'm just going to get my eraser. I don't want to come this far across. Get rid of that dot now, get rid of some of these heavier dots. We've got some very big stones in here which are making this line look like it's coming lower than it should be. It kind of stops here because of this big cornerstone that we've got there. So that's all things that we can look at as we're putting the ink in. That's going to change things slightly. So negative drawing. If we look at this shape where the sun is, and then look back to our shape here, I'm thinking we need it a bit steeper there, and then across. So let's take those scruffy lines out there. So at this point, just refine things a little bit. That shadow's quite vertical, so we're looking at that shape there. And again, you don't see the whole thing because of the tree. So some of that is imagined behind the tree. Okay, so I'm waffling a bit now. we'll go on to putting some of the detail in. When I'm doing something like a bridge, I generally start drawing with the keystone. If you're doing an arch, start with your keystone. So for those of you that don't know, that this stone here is your keystone that kind of holds the whole thing together when you're making an arch. So start with that and work outwards. And this is where we don't need to be measuring and looking at every single individual stone. Just look, they are very narrow, some of these, so you want to get that feeling of them being very narrow and going all the way around, but don't be counting them and worrying about every single one. Just get a feel for it. It's the shape of the arch and the bridge that's the main thing to begin with. Okay, so we'll go on now and put some ink on this and do a lot more detail. Okay, so I've got a Unipin fine liner. It's size 0.5, and this one is obviously waterproof and fade proof, so anything like this would be fine. And if we look at this, I would say that it's midday. You've got the light coming from above, casting this very heavy shadow underneath, and underneath each stone it's very, very dark, because the light simply cannot get under these stones when the sun, when it's noon and the sun is above. So think about that when you're drawing, and don't be frightened to go nice and dark with your pen in these shadowy areas, because that's going to make the lighter areas pop up better as well. So also remember what we said before about if this isn't here, then the shadows from it are also not going to be there. So we'll just worry about the shadows underneath the stones, between the stones, and this big shadow under the bridge itself. How complicated we do these trees, I don't know. We might just make this grass behind and forget about the trees altogether. So like I said, we'll start up at the top with the keystones, or perhaps with some of the stones above, because if we look at the picture, there's one very obvious stone that's right in the centre at the top of the bridge there that's catching the light, because it's a nice light stone with some dark underneath, and that gives us a bit of a starting point. So we could go all the way along with some of these. Again, don't look, well, do look obviously at the photograph, but don't worry about every single one of these stones being exactly the right shape and in exactly the right amount, because it's getting that feel for them and where they're lying and how flat they lie on top of each other. So look at that, you've got some quite long flat shapes as well as these rounder shapes, and just vary the shapes and sizes a bit of each stone. Okay, so I'm not going to talk through all of that, but if you look, you've got here and there, you've got some bigger ones and some smaller ones. You've got those big long flat top stones. These are what we call top stones that sit right on the top of the wall. And then we've got the stones of the archway itself, which are quite different. They're quite slaty, flat looking stones here. So we've got the keystone, basically these two right next to each other there in the middle. And then we're going to go out and around. Some of these are very quite flat, sharp. They've been dressed. So when you talk about dressing a stone, it's when you slice it, chop it to make it fit what you need. And again, don't be frightened to go really dark in between them. So this is where you need to be confident that you've got your pencil lines in the right place before you begin with this archway. So you just need to keep angling them that way. Some are wider than others, some are actually shorter than others. You've got one or two that don't go all the way up to the top there. Perhaps they've cracked over time. And getting that variety in, it's going to make it more believable. If you did them too uniform and all the same, it would look a little bit unnatural. You may also hear now next door's wind chimes, which can get on your nerves a little bit. I don't know if you have wind chimes, but when you hear them all day, every day, they can be a bit annoying. Okay, so I'm not going to talk through the whole thing. I'm just going to, like I said, I'll carry on, I'll show you a little bit more of some of the other parts now. So obviously that's going to go all the way around. at the moment I think we're going to forget about all those trees. So look at some of the most important stones. Now this one, it's quite difficult because if you look at the photograph, the sun is shining on that corner, so it's difficult to see that angle. But this is a cornerstone and it's vital to the structure of holding things together here. So you probably want to make sure you get that one in. And although I said about obviously you need the measurements to make it look believable, but also a lot of these shapes are very irregular. It's a natural stone, it's an old bridge, it's not like working with brick where they're all the same size. So get a bit of that variety. So you'll see underneath that one there's some very small ones, and then we have another large keystone here, taking a lot of the weight from above. So that's going to be, you know, really holding that bridge down. And then another shape that we need here, and we cannot see the individual ones back here because of the shadow, but we can see that line of the shadow and the end of the wall there. So get those shapes in. So there's some areas you need to concentrate a little bit more on than others. So once you get out here doing the wall, it's going to be a lot quicker, but some of these areas in the centre here, and you can, under here, you probably don't want to be doing the underside of each one of these in a lot of detail, but perhaps just use some lines to indicate the way that they're going. You can very faintly see them under there, but not you know, not all the detail. And then this line here is going to be quite a jagged line. It's not a smooth line, the one that we've drawn there in the pencil. It needs to, because it's the edges of those stones. So a lot of concentrating here and looking and thinking about how this bridge was put together as they were building it, and that's going to help you angle your lines in the right direction with these shadows and things. And don't forget, this is going to be really dark over the top later on. So I'll do the drawing of the actual stones and everything, and then I'll come back and talk about doing this shadow underneath.
Gone over this 1,000 times before. Baby, it's now or never. Gotta leave this town, and I know what you're asking for. You say it's out of my reach, but I can't pretend no more. 'Cause for as long A stormy rain tried to wash away the dream. Step one, it says a worn out sign, and the diner's name is California Dreams. Hey, for as long as I remember, it's been stuck inside my mind. You can't ask me to surrender when reaching for the dream keeps me alive. For as long as I remember, it's been stuck inside my mind. You can't ask me to surrender when reaching for the dream keeps me alive. Keeps me alive. For as long as I remember.
Although I've used the same size pen throughout, you will notice that I do go slightly harder and darker and then a little bit lighter. So I pressed on a lot more for the stones and for the shadows under the stones than I did for the water and the indication of the way the land was lying and the grasses. So I've not really drawn all the grasses and things as such. I've just made it obvious that that's where the banking is, just putting some light lines in. I've left this area around here light. And then we've got the river going off up there, so I should say stream, not river. So if we look now, actually there's going to be some shadows along here where the bank is next to the water there. So we could go on putting extra detail in and giving an indication of where some of these stones are and bits of weeds and things underneath the water as well as on top of the water. But we could then end up getting too fussy with the drawing and having making it too complicated so that the shape of the bridge wasn't the main focus, which I think it really ought to be. So it got very complicated here, the walls going off into all these weeds that are growing over it and things. So I just let it sort of fizzle off there and put some lines down here. So we're keeping it in the centre and keeping it a nice crisp shape without too much detail on. So the only thing now really, before we get rid of those pencil lines and put some paint onto it, I mean actually we could go darker in one or two places. You can do this afterwards as well. So once you've finished the painting, if you feel you need to go darker, you can come back on top of the paint with your pen. So you don't need to worry too much about that until the end as well. But we really need to get dark under that bridge because, like I said before, it's midday, the sun's coming from above, there's no way it can get down there. So look carefully at that shadow, and all of this area is in shadow. So for shade, I tend to do parallel lines, vertical lines. Some people use dots and dashes. There's different ways of doing shadow with pen. And if you weren't confident about doing your shadow with your pen, you could actually do that quite simply with your paint later on. So I'm going to go in both directions because I want this to be nice and dark. So I've already got some lines on here that from before, from putting just an indication of one or two of those stones there. And you can go diagonally as well. So don't be afraid to get really dark under here, especially under the edges of the stones there. And by doing so, we're going to make this line stand out. So the shape of the bridge here is going to stand out more by getting those shadows nice and dark. Okay, so it goes in the arch there and then it extends down, but it extends down at an angle. And of course you can always add more shadow, but it's difficult obviously with pen to take it away. So just gradually build it up until you feel you've got it dark enough. And again, you'll see I've got some stone shapes underneath there where I'm doing that shadow. So it just gives us a hint of the continuation of that wall and that those stones are going across there. And that takes us up to the water's edge, but of course the shadow doesn't stop at the water. The shadow goes right across the water and in this direction. Because the light cannot get under there. And this gives us a sense of the time of day that it is. Now, so we've put the shadow in, but of course water always lies flat, so it's a good idea to have some lines, heavier lines, horizontal, so it doesn't look like your water's flowing at an angle. So look carefully at that shadow shape, and I don't think that's too bad. We've got it coming down there, it goes across there and then down. And here we've got some darker areas where the water is flowing over rocks and things that are underneath. So if you look there, there's a lot of detail. Like I said, we want to keep it simple. Just put 1 or 2 lines in to make it obvious that the water is going downhill here. Okay, so I think that's probably enough. If we look again, you're going to have more shadow probably underneath the stones and underneath on top of some of these, but we can build that up with the paint, and if we feel we need some more later we can come back and put those on. So we'll let the pen dry just for a moment, it'll soon be dry, and then we'll come and put on that some watercolours. We've got rid of all those pencil lines now, and we can come to putting the paint on. Now, if you're nervous about watercolour, if you've not done too much, one thing to get confidence with watercolour is to just do a little bit at a time. Do one area at a time and have a lot of patience with it. Perhaps go away while things dry and come back to it. Things tend to go wrong when we rush things and try and do too much at once. So to begin with, I'll tell you what brush I've got. So I've got a size 6 and it's a round one. This is a Dale Rowney one with a nice tip on it. So nothing too big so that we can get into all those nice shapes. And I'm just going to wet the area. Slight little bit of pink there. I don't know where that's come from. That's perhaps come from the last time I was painting. So I'm just going to wet the area, that shape in between the bridge in the background there, and we're going to imagine that that's sky. That the blue's coming all the way down there. So we've completely altered the composition. You don't have to do that. You could do this green to make it out like it was a banking or something, but I'm going to do that area sky. So I've got some cobalt blue and I've added into that a tiny touch of cadmium orange. And by putting the orange in, it just softens it a little bit, makes it less of an obvious blue, makes it more of a natural blue. And there we go. Because we're going onto that wet paper, it just flows out really nicely into that area, and it's going to leave a nice flat wash there. So while that's drying, we'll think about doing the green in the foreground. So again, with some nice clean water, we'll just do one at a time. Where these weeds are coming down over the stones and down towards the water there, we'll just wet the paper, make an uneven shape at the edge there so it's just going off towards the white, and then get the green and this green is sap green, and into that sap green I've popped a little bit of Alizarin crimson, again to make it more of a natural colour. And that's enough. We don't need to add any more than that, just allow it to flow into that water that you've put down and leave it to dry. And then we can come on and do the same on the other side. All the way up the bank in there. And again we'll leave an uneven shape. If you struggle to see clear water on your paper, tilt your head onto the side and look across the paper with your eyes, and you'll pick up any areas that are shining where the water is, or that are dull where you haven't got any water. And again we're just lightly dropping this green in, letting it flow off into the water that we've put down up to the edges, and that's going to be nice and soft. There's not going to be any hard lines. And a lot of these effects you will struggle with and you won't achieve if you're using cheap materials, if you've got a cheap paper. So although this is, you know, it's a student quality paper, it's a good one. So this isn't sponsored by them, I just do use it a lot, the Bockingford block. Okay, so we can leave that to dry as well. And then I'm going to do the sky, but because I want to tilt this whilst I do the sky, I'm going to let them dry and then come on to that. To do the sky, we're going to turn the paper upside down. Again, get some nice clean water on your brush. Go along the line of the top of the bridge. And again, just make quite a rough shape going out to the edges. Nothing too even, and perhaps allow the paper to be dry in places if you wanted to. And then we'll just drop that blue in, but before we do that, I've got a pencil tin here and I'm just going to prop that under the edge of the paper. And allow that to flow down. So just go all the way along the edge of the bridge where we put that water, and then just let it flow into where you've got that water there. You don't need to necessarily paint as such, just drop the colour in. So we're not actually using a lot of colour, I'll just show you how much I've mixed up here. You know, it's very little, it's just to give a touch of colour to this ink drawing. Okay, so we'll leave that to flow that way, and then we'll come back and do some work on the bridge. We'll do the water next, and for that I'm going to use a few different colours combined, because with water you've got reflections of the sky, the stone, the grass, and because we've put all that blue in, which isn't there in the photograph because we've changed things, if we've got that much blue in the sky, that's obviously going to be reflected a little bit in the water, so we're going to make the water a lot lighter than it is in the photograph. If you look very carefully on the photograph, the water is coming over some rocks and things, and there's some little areas of white. So what you could do for those white areas is just leave the paper completely dry so that the water doesn't flow into those areas. So go across with your brush, and every now and again leave a little gap of a white area of dry paper. Don't overdo it, but just here and there leave some paper dry, because the thing is, it's the easiest way to get your highlights, leaving the paper dry, because the paint won't flow onto that where it's dry. And again, leave an uneven edge at the end here. So I'm going to put some green in, because there's going to be little bits of green from reflections, and there could be weed in there, weed going down into the water. So just dip that into the water and let it flow into each other. Sorry, let the colours flow into each other, the next ones we're going to put on. So we're going to put in some blue. So these are just the same colours that we've had before. We don't need to mix any more colours up because it's very harmonious when you put all these colours together. So don't forget to do that shadow bit as well. I did with the green, didn't I? I didn't put much on there. And then the colour that I've got for the stones, the grey colour, which I'll talk through when we do the stones, I'm going to put some of that in as well because it's going to be quite dark under here. And waters are very often dark in areas because, you know, it can be quite deep and it's got shadows and things going on. If you feel you've got too many white highlights, you can cover some of them up. But we want to keep it nice and fresh and light. We don't want it to be too heavy. And then the only other colour I've got here is yellow, which is a raw sienna, which we can see on some of those mosses and things on the bridge. And I'm just going to put a little bit of that in as well. And then those colours will all meld into each other and give us that feel for that water there. Just lighten that area a bit. Okay, so we'll go on to doing the bridge now, and we'll start by doing the arch, and we'll do underneath the arch. So if we wet this shadowed area, and this little end here as well. And then we'll just drop into there this lovely grey colour that we've made. So we've made the grey out of cerulean blue, alizarin crimson and raw sienna. And it's more on the brown side of grey. So when you want your grey to be more brown, add more red and yellow than you do blue. Have slightly gone onto my sky there, so with a dry brush I'll just carefully lift that off, but it doesn't show too much. Okay, and because we've already got the shadow in with the pen, we don't need to be heavy-handed with the colours. We can keep the colours nice and light and fresh and let the white of the paper come through because we've got that shadow already there. So if we look at the picture, the stones are all very similar in colour. In fact, they're very bleached out because the sun is really bright on them. The only difference is really that quite a few of them have got moss on them. So I'm now going to do the rest of the bridge. And I won't go right up to the edge there. And again, like you did with the water, it won't matter if we leave little chinks of white paper here and there nice and dry, so that it looks as if we've got some sunshine on some of those stones. If you want more white paper and you've accidentally gone over it with the water and you end up with too much paint on, just keep some kitchen roll handy, because at this stage, whilst it's wet, it's very easy to lift the paint off. But just as you're going along, just pop the water in and leave some little areas of dry paper. So we'll go in with that grey more or less all over. I've not mixed lots of it because we don't need lots. It's not a huge, enormous drawing. Don't forget with watercolours, they dry more lightly than they go on. So we're not, you know, brushing across the whole thing, covering the whole thing. I've got a very light touch. I'm holding my brush very lightly. I'm letting the end of my brush jiggle around a bit so it's not touching every bit of paper, so that some areas are going to be a lot lighter than others, so we've got a bit of variety in there without really painting it, without really having to think too hard about it. I'll just do that one little stone there. There is obviously some stones here and there in the grass and in the underneath the water as well. So whilst that's still wet, we're going to get onto our brush the green for the moss. And there's an awful lot of moss on this bridge, but we don't want to overdo it. Again, it's quite near the top most of it. And just dib-dab your brush around, jiggle it about a bit and don't overdo it. That's probably enough. And then if we want, we could pop a little bit of yellow in just to brighten the top of the bridge up there. We've got the yellow in the water down here, so it'd be just nice to just pop it here and there. It's the same yellow that's in that grey, so it's going to disperse into the grey and just brighten things up a little bit. So I think really now it looks as if the sun's very much shining on this wall here. And we've got that nice shadow underneath, and we'll leave it to see how it dries, and if we wanted we could come back and put more shadow in with the pen, and we could lighten areas by lifting out the paint, but I don't think we really need to. And like I say, if whilst it's still wet you want some areas to be whiter, you can just dab on with your kitchen roll there, but I don't think we need to because we left those white areas of dry paper. Okay, so I think that's it. I don't think we need to do any more to that, but like I say, you can draw on top again whilst it's once it's dry if you feel you need to go in darker with your pen. That's dried quite nicely and I'm quite happy with it. I don't think we need to do anything else to that. Like I said, you can do, if you want, you can put more detail in with your pen, but I think it's nice to keep it nice and fresh, very little detail other than the actual stones, and just those few simple colours to keep a nice simple little picture. And like I said, do your painting a little bit at a time so that you're not making too many mistakes with that, and try and leave some little chinks of white with the dry paper. The great thing about ink and watercolour is that you can get your darkest shadows, those deepest, darkest shadows where the sun cannot reach underneath those stones with your pen, and you can get your highlights just with the dry paper and the white of the paper. So all you're really doing with your painting is putting on that colour of the mid-tones. You're just thinking about the colour, and you're not having to worry about your tones and about getting your contrast, because your contrast is already there with the very black pen and the very white paper against each other. So everything else is just enjoying yourself doing that drawing and adding those few little colours just to brighten the whole thing up. So I hope you found that useful. Let me know what you think in the comments below. I will put a list of the colours and the materials that I've used in the description below if you want to see those, and of course of the photograph of the bridge itself. Thank you very much for watching. Enjoy your own painting and drawing. I'll be back again with you soon. Bye bye for now.